What is up, YouTube? Dottz Gaming here, and today I will be covering champion points, but a little bit different than the other guides I have covered. Other guides that I have done have covered champion points on how to optimize them once you already have a setup. I've done the basics, and I've also covered jump points, but this guide is going to cover all of the CP stars, why you should choose certain points over others, and basically how to get that initial setup so that you can further optimize it later on. Two videos I would definitely recommend watching before this one is my CP Basics Guide if you don't know what champion points are or the basics behind them, and then definitely recommend looking at the Champion Point Jump Point Guide because I'm going to be referencing a lot of that information here in this video. I am sorry about my voice. I am sick while I'm recording this, but I wanted to make sure to get this video out to you guys in a timely manner. But do remember, guys, champion points are very personal. Everyone's got their preferences on what champion points they like, and champion points actually are going to vary based on individual builds. Going to vary a lot based on personal preferences, but this is just going to be my opinion on the different CP stars. This is by no means gospel, but this is just my opinions from all the testing that I've done and all of what I have experienced and know about CP. Now, the blue is going to take me the longest to cover. Just keep that in mind. The blue is going to take the longest to cover. With green and red, I'm going to be able to cover these much faster, but the blue is generally the one that's going to vary a lot from build to build. So the blue is going to take me the longest to cover, so I'm going to start with the blue because generally that could be a lot of the reason why people are here. So the first thing I do need to talk about, though, is these points up here. All right, so like Arcane Well, Foresight, Spell Precision, Vengeance, Tactician, stuff like this. So you see here, unlocked an Apprentice rank 120. What that means is that once you have 120 points into the Apprentice champion point tree, you will unlock Arcane Well as a passive bonus. You don't have to put any more points into it. You don't have to do anything. Once you have 120 points into the Apprentice, you gain Arcane Well, simply put. But now I'm going to move directly into the stars, talk about which ones I like, which ones I don't, which ones apply to which class, which ones are which role, which ones I don't think are as useful, etc. Starting off with Blessed. And Blessed increases your healing, done. Now, this is going to be obviously very beneficial for tanks and healers, not useful at all for PvE DPS, and then useful in niche situations for PvP DPS. The only reason I would recommend Blessed in a PvP situation for DPS is if you feel like you have extra points to spare. If you feel like your damage is okay after testing and you feel like you have some extra points that you could move into a more defensive star, Blessed would be your option. I generally don't like investing too many points in a Blessed. The highest I think I'd go is maybe something like 23 points, 27 points, if that. I don't ever like to go higher than that because Blessed is a 15% star. It does not scale very well. The jump points, it doesn't favor this as a star to put a lot of points in because I feel like your damage suffers too much. But again, you can put some points in here if you have the room. I know I run some in here on my Nightblade. I plan on running some in here next patch on my Dragon Knight, but I generally, again, this is very niche for PvP DPS. It's only if you feel like your damage is okay, and then obviously tanks and healers are going to get a lot of benefit after this. So Elfborn increases the damage and healing of your critical strikes with a Magicka ability. So obviously Stamina DPS will not be taking any advantage of Elfborn. Elfborn's a really good star. You will be investing points into it pretty much no matter what as a damage dealer. I'd say if your crit is like on the lower side between maybe like 25 and 35%, like in the 20s or 30 percentage wise, you maybe only want to go probably between 23 and 37 points into here. You don't want to go crazy. You're not going to be critting all that much, so you don't want to over invest points into here because if you're not critting, you're technically losing out on damage. But once you're probably like 40 to 50% or above, you could definitely put more points into this, and I'm talking like 40 points, 56, between like 40 and probably like 66 points. Like there's a lot of room to play with based on what your crit is. I'd say I generally, if my crit is like 45, 50%, I generally like to go 56 points into Elfborn from a PvP perspective. My Constellations optimized my Elfborn to 40% for my PvE build. But again, you generally want to put Points into here no matter what. How many points you put into here is really going to vary based on your crit, so just something to keep in mind. Tanks and healers, you're definitely going to want to be investing a lot of points into here. This star is very beneficial for you. If your heals are magicka based, getting a nice crit with your heals is going to be huge in getting a lot of health back in a pinch. So as a tank and healer, you're going to be wanting investing a lot of points in here. But like I said, for a damage dealer, the amount of points you put in here is really going to vary based on how high your crit is. The more crit you have, the more points I'd put into Elfborn. The less crit you have, the less points I'd put into Elfborn. How much really is going to fall to your personal preference and what you like and enjoy. You also have Elemental Expert, which increases your Flame, Frost, Shock, and magic damage by a certain percent. So again, obviously stamina DPS not taking really any advantage of this. Tanks and healers generally won't use this all that much either. Healers will put some points into here, but tanks not really. But yeah, healers could put some points into here. They do have some damage dealing ability, so being able to boost those up is going to be really, really nice. So you'll generally see healers put like, you know, between like 20 something and 40 points in here. You're not going to go crazy, but having some points in here is still very beneficial. But for magic and DPS, you're going to want to be putting, in my opinion, at least 43 points a minimum into here. It's a 15% star, so it's not the best scaling star in the world, but I'd say you should be putting at least 43 points in Elemental Expert. I would never go higher than like me. I've on past builds, I've gone up to 75 in PvP, but I've usually ended up moving some points around and probably going back down to 56, because that's like almost 20 points gained for 2% damage, you know? So it really is going to depend on your build and where you find your sweet spot to be, but as a Magicka DPS, as long as you're above 43, you're pretty much in the green. So you can keep messing with this to find what is the sweet spot for you. You also have Spell Erosion, increases your spell penetration. Again, Magic is going to be the only people taking advantage of this. Tanks, stamina DPS, and usually healers won't be using much Spell Erosion. Healers maybe could put some points in here, but again, this is mainly going to be a Magic and DPS star. If you're in heavy armor, I would, for PvP, I'd recommend really boosting this up. If you're in light armor, you don't have to put nearly as many points in here because you get penetration passively from your armor. But again, you could keep putting points in here and experimenting to find out what is your sweet spot for spell penetration. But again, this is really going to be a Magicka damage dealing star that you would put points into here. Next is Shattering Bloats, which increases your damage done to enemies with the shields by X%. Now, I've personally found that as a Magicka DPS, I've never really been able to take advantage of this well. I don't think it's that great of a star for Magicka DPS. It can be good if you have a lot of problems with Sorks, like Mag Sorks, but I don't think for Magic it's that great of a star. For tanks and healers, you're obviously not going to be using it. But the only time I'd ever really invest points into this is as a PvP stamina character. And the reason I say that is because for stamina, it's very, very easy to invest points to get up to Tactician, which is going to be a very important star for PvP, which is when you roll dodge and attack, you set an enemy off balance. It's going to be very important to get this because this combines well with Exploiter from the Ritual, which increases your damage done against off-balance enemies by 10%. So just by dodge rolling, which is going to be something you do normally anyway, you're going to be dealing 10% more damage, which is huge. It's absolutely huge. So putting points into here to get up to Tactician, 120 points in the Atronach is very important, and Shattering Blows could be a good vehicle to help get your points up to here. So again, for stamina, it's very easy to put points in here to get up to here. Again, as Magic, you won't be doing it as much, but just keep in mind that points into here means that dealing damage against enemies without a shield will go down, but a lot of times stamina characters can take advantage of that in PvP and utilize Shattering Blows. If you don't like Shattering Blows, you can always put points in a Physical Weapons Expert, which increases your damage done with light and heavy attacks with two-handed, one-handed shield, and dual-wielded bow weapons by X%. Not as relevant now this patch. I usually put a little bit of points in here, like on my Stand Blade for some supporting damage in PvP. But generally, I don't really put that many points in here, if any at all. Next patch, this will become much more relevant with light attacks getting buffed in Somerset. But as of right now, this is really like a meh star. If your Constellations tells you to put points in here for your PvE damage parsing, you can absolutely put some points in here, but it's generally not all that great. For tanks, on the other hand, this is an amazing star, definitely taking advantage of this. Obviously, for Magic and DPS and healers, it says increase your damage done with the melee weapons and bows. you're not really going to be using this, so I wouldn't bother putting any points into here. But again, tanks and sometimes stamina DPS can really take advantage of this. And then on the other side of the coin, we have Staff Expert. It increases your damage done with light and heavy attacks for destruction and restoration stats by X%. Again, not as relevant this patch, but will become more relevant next patch with light attacks being buffed. Same logic that applied to Physical Weapon Expert applies to Staff Expert. So, except for tanks, it really won't be taking advantage of Staff Expert as much because they use one-handed shield. Now, moving on to my favorite CP star, Master at Arms. Increases your damage done with direct damage attacks by X%. This is a 25% star, while Elemental Expert from Magicka, so increases your damage done, is a 15% star. Master at Arms is a 25% star, which means that you're going to get more return for the points here than you do for the points here. As you can see, I have 49 points here, 11% gained, while 52 points here, I have 19% gained. That's huge. Master at Arms is a very important star, but it depends on your build, whether or not you're going to want to go super, super heavy into something like this, or maybe heavier into Thaumaturge, which increases your damage with Dottz by 16%. Now, there's a reason I'm covering these two together, and it's because your build and your abilities and your class is really going to depend on whether or not you utilize heavily Master at Arms or Thaumaturge. Now, what constitutes direct damage? Because that's going to be a lot of people's question immediately. Dottz, what constitutes direct damage? If you look at my skills here, right, we have Flame Lash. Lash an enemy with flame, dealing X flame damage. You're whipping somebody, and you're instantly dealing flame damage. That is direct damage. All right? You're hitting somebody, you're dealing damage directly. That's instant damage. But then if you look at something like Burning Embers, slash an enemy with flame, dealing flame damage, and then an additional flame damage over 10.5 seconds. That initial hit is direct damage, instantaneous, boom, flame damage. But the 15k flame damage over 10 seconds is damage over time. So the first hit of Burning Embers will be amplified by Master at Arms, while the second hit will be amplified by, or the dot hits over the 10.5 seconds will be amplified by Thaumaturge. So that's how you know whether or not you need to be putting points into Master at Arms or you need to be putting points into Thaumaturge. So something like Jabs from the Templar is going to fall under Thaumaturge, while again, like I said, Flame Lash, Swallow Soul falls under Master at Arms. So just something to keep in mind when you are investing your points. Now again, like I said, Thaumaturge increases your damage with Dottz by X%. It's a really good star. For PvE, it is definitely more useful than PvP. I generally don't invest in it too crazily in PvP, as generally direct damage and burst is going to be what you want. But for PvE, it's a really good start. For PvP, it's not bad. I know this is a lot of people have a lot of varying opinions on Thaumaturge when it comes to PvP. I generally think that it's either good to put a little bit into here to get some supporting damage from your dots and stuff. The way I always say it is that if your dots are generally only supporting damage for your main big burst, I generally wouldn't put too many points in here, if any at all. If your dots are a huge part of your damage, though, then definitely put some points in here. But again, this is really going to be personal preference in a PvP environment. Master at Arms, as you can tell, it just applies to direct damage. It's not exclusive to Magicka or Stamina. Same thing with Thaumaturge, applies to dots, not directly exclusive to Magicka or Stamina. But like I said, the reason that Stamina are going to very easily reach Exploiter is because Mighty, Piercing, and Precise Strikes all are Stamina based. So being able to put points into these three, points into Thaumaturge, and points into Master at Arms and other stuff here is going to make it easy to combine Tactician. When you roll dodge an attack, you set an enemy off balance, and Exploiter increases your damage done against off balance enemies by 10%. Very good for PvP. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, so let me come back here. So we covered Thaumaturge, basically. We covered the whole dot thing. Again, good star. We have Precise Strikes, increases your damage and healing with your critical strikes of stamina abilities by X%. This is the Elfborn for stamina. So everything I said about Elfborn pretty much applies to Precise Strikes. Except for, again, stamina abilities. If your heals are stamina based, put points into Precise Strikes. So as a tank, look at your kit. If your heals are mainly from Magicka abilities, put points in Elfborn. If your heals are mainly from stamina abilities, put points into Precise Strikes. You have Piercing, which increases your physical penetration by X%. So as a stamina user, if you need to either make sure that you're getting your physical penetration a lot from your CP and or from your gear set, since you do not get it passively from your gear like Magicka does. So you're definitely going to want to be putting a good bit of points into here. So Piercing is again, the amount of physical penetration you need is going to really depend on the gear sets you're wearing, whether or not you're getting Major Fracture passively from your gear, but you're going to want to be putting a good bit of points into here. As a stamina DPS, again, Magicka obviously not getting any benefit from it since it's physical penetration. Healers obviously not, and then tanks are generally not finding much benefit out of this. Anyway, Mighty increases your physical poison disease damage done by X%. This is the Elemental Expert for stamina. Again, all the stuff I said about Elemental Expert applies to Mighty. It's a great star. You generally don't want to go crazy with this, though. I'd say at least 43 points, but you don't want to go absolutely crazy with the star. Again, Master at Arms and Thaumaturge scale much better. That's where you're going to want to be putting a lot of points, but Mighty is definitely still good to put some points into. So that is the blue CP, guys. That is how you put your champion points in for the blue CP. If you just, a lot of people get really overwhelmed. They see all these stars. They don't understand what they mean. Just take it one star at a time and read it. And look, increases flame, frost, and shock, and magic damage done by 11%. If you're playing a stamina tune, do you really think you're going to need this, So just take a little bit of time, read what the CP stars do, look at your character and what your character's doing, and then further decide whether or not you want the CP stars or not. As a tank, like I said, you're going to want to be mainly looking into Blessed, Physical Weapons Expert, Elfborn, or Precise Strikes based on your healing types. As a healer, you're mainly going to want to be looking into, again, Elfborn, Blessed, maybe Master at Arms, Thaumaturge, Ellie Expert, depending on what's in the rest of your kit, but Elfborn and Blessed are going to be your big two. And then for DPS, I pretty much covered that already. Now, like I said, the blue tree definitely is the most variety. Moving on to red, definitely a little bit easier to decide. We have Ironclad. Reduces the damage taken from direct attacks by X%. If you're getting hit instantly with damage, Ironclad is going to prevent it. Ironclad is, again, it's a 25% star. This thing scales beautifully. I would recommend for everybody, regardless of your role, I think you should be putting at least 56 or like 53, 56 points. Let me look at the jump point, actually, so I don't make a mistake here. I recommend putting at least 56 points into Ironclad. It's such a good star. Not putting as many points into this, you're going to be taking more damage. So much stuff in this game, PvE and PvP, is considered direct damage, so you want to invest pretty heavily into Ironclad. Especially because you do like to get, for PvP, getting to Resilient is pretty important. When you take critical damage, you heal yourself 4x health, which can really help you stay alive in a PvP environment. Now, also, Spell Shield increases your spell resistance by X%. Really, really good for a Trials environment. A lot of stuff is magic damage, so being able to reduce that damage done by having extra resistance is very, very important. You really don't see this star as much in a PvP environment because people are mainly investing into critical resistance or percent mitigation, not as much into resistances. So you generally are going to be using this star in a PvE environment. And mainly from DPS. Tanks will generally be resistance capped from their gear and from their skills. They generally won't need any more resistances from their CP, but PvE, DPS, and healers will be finding Spell Shield very, very beneficial. And that pretty much covers that. Medium Armor Focus increases your physical resistance by X while wearing 5 or more pieces of medium armor. I don't think this is all that great. Same thing with Light Armor Focus, and then I believe there's also a Heavy Armor Focus. I don't think those stars are all that great, personally. Gaining those extra resistances, I think you're much better off putting points into something like Ironclad or the other stars I'm going to cover. And I'm going to come back to these and explain why. Increases your critical resistance by X% resistant. Resistant is useless for PvE because the mobs do not crit, but for PvP, this is going to be very important. I'd personally say you want to make sure your crit resistance is at least 2,000. That is what I personally have found to be the minimum. that I like. I know some people play with lower, but I don't like to play with less than 2k. So if after you have all your gear and everything on, you have below 2k crit resist, definitely shove points into here until you at least reach that margin. Now we have Thick Skin. Reduces your damage taken from Dottz by X%. This is the counter to Thaumaturge or just damage over time effects in general. Again, very important for PvE. Putting points into Thick Skin is will prevent a lot of those big heavy Dottz from dealing as much damage as they could onto you. Same thing from PvP. You have a lot of bleed builds running around right now, and this will help counteract those. You also have Hardy, which it reduces your damage taken from physical poison and disease damage by X%. And then same thing with Elemental Defender, reduces your damage taken from Flame, Frost, Shock, and Magic damage by X%. Now, Hardy and Elemental Defender are 15% stars, while Ironclad and Thick Skinned are 25% stars. Okay, so the points into Thick Skinned and Ironclad are going to benefit you more than putting points into Hardy and Elemental Defender. Now, through my experiences, and this is, again, just me, I would never, ever, ever put more than 43 points. You could never put more than 43 points into Hardy and to Elemental Defender. I think that is the cap for these stars. Past that, they're beginning to diminish. The returns are beginning to diminish too much, and you would be much better off putting points into Thick Skinned or to Ironclad. So, as you can tell, this is kind of the counterbalance to Mighty, and this is the counterbalance to Elemental Expert. So a lot of the same logic applies. I would say don't go above 43 points. The defensive scaling from Thick Skinned and Ironclad is much better than than Hardy and Ellie Defender, because Thick Skin applies to physical Dottz, magic Dottz, everything. Well, Hardy only applies to physical typed damage. Elemental Defender only applies to magic typed damage. Ironclad applies to all type damage, similarly to Thick Skin. So you'd find much more benefit going heavier, especially into Ironclad, and probably into Thick Skin, and not as much into Hardy and Ellie Defender. I would say you could go up to 43 points in each of these max, but I would not go any more. My personal preference for a minimum into these stars is 32. I generally play between 32 and 43 points, depending on my build. So, again, keep that in mind. Now, again, this is percent mitigation. Reduces your damage taken from those by 10%, as opposed to light armor focus. Increases your physical resistance while wearing 5 or more pieces of light armor. Here's the way I explain it. Penetration will mitigate light armor focus, medium armor focus, heavy armor focus, and spell shield. Hardy and Elemental Defender cannot be mitigated by penetration. That is why I generally like these stars more than light armor focus, medium armor focus, and heavy armor focus. At least that's my understanding of how they work. You can, if you really, really are unhappy with your resistances, you can put some more points into medium, light, and heavy armor focus, but I would be more inclined to look at your build as opposed to maybe changing it up in CP. Let's say you're a light armor build and you're wearing 5 pieces of light, 1 medium, 1 heavy, and you feel like your resistances are too low. Maybe you should be trying to wear 5-2, 5 light, 2 heavy, instead of going for the 5-1-1 for the max stats. Same thing for stamina. Not happy with your resistances. Maybe you should try wearing 5-2 instead of 5-1-1. Again, also are your heavy pieces your big pieces, either your head, your chest, or your legs? Or are they little pieces? If they're your little pieces, make sure you move them to your big pieces and you'll see an increase in your resistances. But generally from CP, I much prefer the percent mitigation, as I think you just gain way more benefit from these than the armor focuses. You also have Bastion, which increases the effectiveness of your damage shields. If you use a damage shield and you have some extra points, I would definitely shove some into here. Or if shields are your main way of mitigation, especially as a Swork, pumping up Bastion is going to be very, very, very important. So, again, it's going to be very build dependent whether or not you go into Bastion. Already covered heavy armor focus. Expert Defender will be much more relevant next patch than it is currently. It reduces the damage taken from light and heavy attacks by X%. Currently, right now, I would not put points into this. Next patch, though, definitely would recommend putting points into this for PvP perspective. PvE, you're not going to need this at all. But from a PvP perspective, I would 100% recommend putting points into here because light and heavy attacks are going to be dealing a lot of damage next patch. So this is definitely, from a PvP perspective, going to be worth it. You also have quick recovery, which increases your healing done by healing received by X%. This is basically goes along the exact same line of logic that I covered with Blessed. If you feel like you have enough damage mitigation put into Ironclad, Thick Skin, Hardying, Elemental Defender, and Resistant if you're talking about PvP, and you have enough points in a Bastion if you're using shields, and you have points left over, you could put some into Quick Recovery. Again, Quick Recovery does not scale very well. It's a 15% star. So I'd say only put points in a Quick Recovery, again, if you feel like you could spare them. And again, I would generally not put more than 20-something points into Quick Recovery. I think any higher than that, you really would be getting a better benefit from one of these percent mitigations. But again, that is just my personal opinion. So as you can tell, blue deals with damage, red deals with defense. Now, what do you think green deals with? Sustain. Resource management. So, Warlord reduces the cost of break free by X%. Very useful. Very, very useful. PvP, PvE. Everyone is going to be taking advantage of Warlord. How much points you would like to put into Warlord is really going to vary based on personal preference. I'd say definitely put some into here. I've seen people go as low as 20-something points, as high as 60-something points, even up to 70-something points. It's really going to vary based on person to person. But I know as a magic and DPS and a stamina DPS, I always put at least 56 points into here. Always. Tanks could probably put a little bit less, but I'd say most people are going to be putting at least 56 points in a Warlord. I'd say I've put between me personally, I've put anywhere from 40 to 56 in a Warlord. That has just been my personal sweet spot. Again, find out what works for you. That is what works for me. Sprinter, reduce the cost of sprint by X%. Sprinter, I believe, is actually a 35% star. I want to say, I could be wrong. I believe Sprinter is a 35% star. If you find yourself sprinting a lot, this could definitely be worth putting points into. You don't have to put that many points into it because the star scales super well, scales really, really high. So you don't have to put all that many points into it to receive a huge benefit from it. But again, you're not going to really be using this as magic and DPS. You're not really going to be using this in PvE. But in PvP, if you're a stamina DPS and find yourself sprinting a lot, could be worth looking into. Again, a lot of personal preference here. Siphoner, when you deal damage with light or heavy attacks, you decrease the enemy's health, magic, and stamina resource, restore, and recovery by X% for 3 seconds. This is going to be your Cancer CP star for PvP. It's really strong in preventing enemy mitigation. If you do put points into this, again, it does not scale very well. I don't generally put any points into here because I prefer to look at my own resource sustain and up my own resource sustain. But if you feel like your resource sustain is perfectly fine and you just want to screw with your opponents, you can put some points in here. I can't really tell you how many points is best because I generally don't play with this, but it's a 15% star. So if you do put points into it, I really wouldn't go that crazy. Maybe 20-something points at the very max, but I feel like any more than that, you might be screwing your own resource management too much. You also have Bashing Focus, reduces the cost of bash by X%. If you find yourself bashing a lot, or if you find yourself bash weaving a lot, would definitely recommend putting points into this. Again, this is a very personal preference. If you are not good at bash weaving or don't ever bash weave, don't put any points into here. But if you think, if you find yourself bash weaving a lot or just bashing a lot in general, putting points into here could be worth it. Again, this is definitely useful for anybody using a sword and shield. But otherwise, again, it's not all that great. But it's all about whether or not you bash a lot. That's it. You have Mooncalf, increases your stamina recovery by X%. So if you're a stamina toon, you're going to want to be putting points into Mooncalf. Now, how many points you put into Mooncalf is going to very much depend on what your base recovery is. If you're getting a lot of recovery from your gear, you're going to want to put more points into Mooncalf. If you're not getting a lot of recovery from your gear, you're not going to want to put as many points into Mooncalf. And some of you might be asking why. It increases your recovery by X%. So taking 10% of, let's say, 1,000 versus taking 10% of, let's say, 2,000 is going to be a huge difference. Okay, so you're not going to want to you're not going to get nearly as much benefit out of this if you have a lower number, because you're going to be increasing it by a smaller amount. But if you have a bigger number, because you're increasing it by a percentage, you're going to get a bigger increase. So how many points you personally put in a Mooncalf is really going to depend on your personal gear and personal build as a stamina user. But it's definitely worth putting points into for sure. And the same logic goes to Arcanist for Magicka. I generally don't recommend putting any points into healthy. I don't know anyone that does. I could be very wrong. Maybe if you play some sort of weird health recovery build, you could make this star work. Or if you use Troll King, you could use healthy. Obviously can't use it if you're a vampire, because that'll completely get mitigated by the vampirism. But there's much other better stars than healthy, and I generally don't recommend putting any points into here. Tenacity increases your magic and stamina if you're fully charged heavy attacks by X%. Really, really good for PvE. Really good for restoring your resources from those heavies. Very, very good for healers, especially because your resto heavies are already restoring a lot of... Basically, anybody that uses a resto staff, so PvP as well, your resto heavies already restore a lot of resources passively from the resto staff passives, but being able to boost that up even higher via the Tenacity star is going to be very, very beneficial. I mean, whether or not you want to use this as a tank, I mean, you generally don't want to drop block that much, and if you do, it's for key moments. I'm not really sure if tanks are going to find much benefit out of this. I think that tanks could find their points put in better places, but Tenacity is basically... I like Tenacity if you heavy attack a lot. Let's say like a Stamplar. I know Stamplars find themselves heavy attacking a lot, so Tenacity is going to be really good for you. And then for like I said, anybody that uses a resto staff. So you find yourself using heavy attacks a lot, put points into Tenacity. That's the shorthand version of it. Then we also have Befoul. Increases the effectiveness of your healing reduction abilities by X%. So again, if you find yourself having healing reduction in your kit and are in PvP, this is going to be awesome for you. Befoul scaled stupidly high at the time of making this video. I believe it's a 35% star. It just scales so high. So being able to increase the effectiveness of those healing reduction abilities is going to allow you and your group to take down opponents very quickly, because they'll be unable to recover. So if you feel that your personal resource management is good enough and you have healing reduction in your kit, I would recommend pumping up Befoul for sure. You have Shade, reduces the cost of sneak by X%. Don't recommend this at all unless you're doing some sort of RP sneak build. But definitely do not think this is worth it at all. There is much better stars to use. Next we have Tumbling, which reduces the cost of roll dodge by X%. Tumbling is a really good star. I like it a lot. Pretty much everybody could find advantage out of it. The more that I've been playing and testing and messing with my champion points, the more I'm liking Tumbling. How many points you put into it, though, again, is going to vary based on how much you roll dodge. If you find yourself blocking more than roll dodging, maybe don't put as many points into Tumbling. Maybe only put 30-something points into Tumbling. If you find yourself roll dodging more than blocking, put more points into Tumbling, and don't really put much into Shadow Ward, which is this one, because you're using roll dodge. Again, it's going to vary based on your build and how you're playing. Then you have Shadow Ward, which reduces the cost of block by X%. So this is going to be the big boy star for tanks and for anybody that's using a sword and a shield. You're going to want to boost this up at least by 72 points. Shadow Ward's going to want to be one of those stars that you just put as many points into it as you feasibly can. For sword and board users, it's just really, really good. And those are going to be primarily the people taking advantage of it. PvE DPS can take a little bit advantage out of it just to reduce that cost of block by a little bit. But I generally like to favor more points into Tumbling. But you can maybe like dip in here a little bit, as I did here. As you can tell, I put 16 points in here, so you can dip into it just a little bit. But again, kind of personal preference in what you find that you need the most. But that's it, guys. That is my champion point guide. I hope that this really explained a lot behind the CP. I do get a lot of questions still, even to this day, about what CP should I be putting points into? Why do you people prefer this CP star over this CP star? And again, this is just my findings from messing with the CP. The CP is so personal, and anybody that's playing ESO for a long time will tell you CP is very personal, it's very build dependent, and it's very individual based on what people find to be the best for them. So again, take this for what you will. This is just my opinion, and I hope this guide helped you all out. And if you liked the information in this guide and you got some benefit from it, I'd appreciate it if you smacked a like on it. For more guides like this and for more awesome ESO content here on the Dottz Gaming YouTube channel, I'd appreciate if you hit that sub button, as well as hit the little bell next to it to keep notifications on so you're always aware of what I'm doing here on my channel. So thank you guys so much for watching this guide. Any questions, leave them below. I'm Dottz Gaming, and I'll see you all next time.